everybody, and thanks for joining me for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Reed. You can find me as Bluffsterini in the home games. I've got the best job in the world. I'm the luckiest guy out there. I get to sit around here every week and talk to this wonderful panel of recreational wizards as we go through the world of the Rec Poker forums, hand by hand and post by post. So I'd like to thank our wonderful sponsors, website AMP and the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. And I'd also love to thank everyone on the Wrecking Crew that you can find out about by going to rec.poker/crew, or you can just open up your ear holes because you're about to hear from a few of them tonight.
I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 on the PokerStars home game.
And I am John Somsky. I am Poker Geek MN everywhere.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I am Fergie56 on the home game and PetVet33 everywhere else.
And I'm Radman50, and I'm Rob Wasserman. I'm Radman50 everywhere.
We're joined tonight by Joseph, Stuart, and John, some premium members here at Rec Poker that I'm excited to have in the conversation. So let's jump right into it. Why don't we? It's Monday night. We're getting together to talk poker. We've pulled a hand from the Rec Poker forums, which are free to join and post in. I encourage everyone to do that. Head on over to rec.poker and sign up for a free account there. All it takes is an email address and a smile. And we are looking at a hand posted by the one and only Taylor Moss. And his question is this the time for a live read? So this is a hand from the 250 Saturday morning tournament at Canterbury Park. And Taylor says he's got some history on the under the gun opponent. His first impression is that they were a newer player, haven't seen them previously, and the way they acted just gave them this sense that they were a newer player. After the first two levels, someone sat down to his left and started chatting like they knew each other before. This new guy seemed way more experienced, so I started to reconsider what I thought of this specific opponent. Their tendencies. They've shown a relentless ability to bet. Seems like every time they play a hand, they're betting and betting big. We've only seen the showdown once, and the opponent had a straight flush. But worth noting on the straight flush hand, the villain flopped a pair, donk led flop, bet turn, and bet river after going runner for the straight flush. Onto the hand. So it's the 200, 300, 300 level. Villain's under the gun with 35K. Raises to 900, which is 3 times the big blind. Button calls. Heroes in the big blind with about 16K. And calls with 7 of clubs, 4 of clubs. Do we want to stop there and talk about this, or should we just continue in to the rest of the hand? I know Chris and Kim and a couple other folks had a couple things they wanted to talk about. Why don't I just keep going through Taylor's comments here? So flop comes 8 of clubs, 7 of spades, 6 of hearts. The hero, so we've got the 7 of 4 of clubs. So we've got the second pair, gutter ball straight, and a backdoor flush. We check, which I'm sure we're going to be doing most of the time here. Under the gun bets 1K, which is a pretty small bet relative to the size of the pot. Button folds, hero calls. The turn is the 2 of hearts, pretty bricky. The hero checks, under the gun bets 3.5. And this is the point that Taylor wants to talk about in the hand here. In this spot, it felt like make or break moment. I've got a pair, and opponent's range is full of overcards, and unfortunately overpairs as well. I consider a raise to deny equity from hands like ace-king that could spike a better pair than us. Plus, our hand has some sneaky backup equity versus a lot of their range. 7s, 5s, and 4s should all be good for us. So ultimately decided to just call because I thought there would be a decent chance of a check back on rivers given how strong our range looked with just a call here. If anybody wants to jump in, just unmute. Otherwise, I'll take us into the river here. 2 of spades, hero checks, under the gun bets 7K. So the comment here from Taylor is probably the only card that overpairs would feel comfortable still betting, because now they beat all of our 2-pair combos if we get counterfeited by the 2 here on the river. So the board is now 8 of clubs, 7 of spades, 6 of hearts, 2 of hearts, 2 of spades. Taylor counts out his stack. It's pretty much an all-in for me. He'd have some chips left, but only a fraction of a starting stack. This does feel like a very polarized spot for our opponent. So to me, it just comes down to how likely are they bluffing and how likely do they go for value with their overpairs. I'm having a tough decision. And then it happens. I look over at my opponent because he's directly on my left. And because he's so close and he's looking down, I know he cannot see me staring over at his behavior. It's obvious. He's shaking. He's got a very fast pulse rate. My first thought, he's faking. He knows I was looking at him, so he started to act nervous. But the more I think about it, the more I think this is genuine. He can't see my eyes, and he was shaking as soon as I looked at him. Oh, how I wish I could have seen his reaction during the straight flush hand. Ugh. So we're left to make a big decision here. Can we call here? The bet sizing indicates polarized range, and our opponent's reaction only strengthens that view of mine. Do you call here? So that is the question. Kim, you won the race to unmute first. Do you call here, and why or why?
Do you want me to answer that question first or go back to the flop action?
Ooh, whatever you like.
I can answer that question first because it's something that I've talked about a few times on this, and that is when to decide when you're deciding whether to make a big river call or not. And it's the Ryan LaPlante trick. I
knew you were going to bring up the Ryan LaPlante trick.
Yes,
that's a great one.
Because it's so important because this is what someone looks like when they're bluffing and when they have a big hand. They're breathing fast. They may be shaking. They're excited about a big hand and they're nervous if they're bluffing. So you have to just sit and wait. And you have to wait 2 minutes because if they have a big hand, they can't help it, but their breathing just slows and they're just a lot calmer after 2 minutes. They can't, that's just part of the natural body's reaction. But if they're bluffing and they know you're watching them and under scrutiny, their breathing doesn't slow down and they're still really nervous after 2 minutes. So I've used that in live tournaments a few times. And when their breathing is slowed down and I've called, I've been wrong because I didn't follow it. And when their breathing is still really fast and I've called, I've been right. So I think, yes, I would call after 2 minutes if it hadn't slowed down and calmed down. And no, I would fold if after 2 minutes the breathing had calmed down and the person looked not as nervous.
I mean, that is one nice thing about facing polarized ranges, right? Is that they're binary, essentially. So if you can exclude one, then you kind of have the other, which is nice. Like if you really are dealing with the polarized range, if you can get something that tells you it's more towards this side or to the other side, that's just extremely, extremely valuable if you can apply it. So I hope you never stop mentioning that Ryan LaPlante trick because I just think that one's great. It's hard.
Amazing.
It's hard for some players to think like, no, I'm just going to take over 2 minutes and think about this and just like let my opponent stew and get some good information. But river bets, like river situations, you should take some time for. You've got a lot of data to work with. And we don't play the river as often as we play other hands. So take your time, use your time bank, and get all the info you can from your opponents. I totally agree.
Right. And having said that, if the breathing slows down and they're very calm within a minute, you can just fold.
That's true. That's a good point. Rob?
I was going to say he made a comment in here is he wished he would have seen his reaction when he had a straight flush earlier. So that's very important, and something that I think a lot of people don't do is pay attention, even when you're not in a hand, to opponent, especially the players that are in a big hand and a big decision point. See what they look like, see how they react, and then hopefully see a showdown to understand what they were doing it with. And that really would inform his decision now when he sees this action going on. I like what Kim said about what Ryan LaPlante's little trick. I mean, that's great. But at the same time, if you pay attention early on throughout the tournament and see these types of reactions, you can get an idea whether that's real. I mean, does this mean he has a big hand or does this mean he doesn't? And you may know that it may inform you of that earlier.
Like, I don't think this guy's faking it here. He's either bluffing or he's got a big hand, and we just have to decipher which. He's not faking his reaction. I think it's hard to fake that shaking and fast breathing.
Yeah, and Zach Elwood, when we talk to him about tells and that sort of thing, because he comes and helps us produce some content for our premium members from time to time, he always reinforces that point too, that the most important thing is to establish a baseline, because different people are going to have these, they're going to show these effects in different circumstances. So it's about establishing a baseline, and like, are they chatty? Are they quiet? When was the last time they were quiet if they're chatty all the time? When was the last time they were chatty if they're quiet all the time? Little stuff like that. Eric Anderson is a premium member, and he's amazing in the forums. He always puts fantastic stuff in the forums. This response that he's got here references his Quizlet on tells, and he's just goes through a whole bunch of tells that he's already sort of gone through and categorized and talked about. But he makes the great point that my buddy flopped quads at our home game last week. He was shaking so bad he dropped his chips. It's like, yeah, because it's excitement and fear kind of expressed similarly, like Kim's talking about there. So being able to figure out which one it is, stuff like that can be really helpful. Chris, you had a response here. Do you want to comment on that? I know you talk about the read specifically, but also there's a question of like, what actual hands might they choose in this spot?
Yeah, I mean, I think Taylor mentioned in his post, like, oh, the second deuce counterfeits any two pair, and so the player might feel more comfortable with their overpairs. But I feel like the more extreme we see these kind of physical reactions, the more that it doesn't tell me necessarily they're weak or strong, but it tells me it goes to more extreme polar. The way I read that is more extreme polarized. Like, I would be pretty shocked if this player did this and had queens or something. Like, to me, this feels like set or better, or kind of garbage, like ace king or ace queen kind of in this spot. And that's a big thing that I like. The nice thing about this kind of thing is even if you can't, I love this Ryan LaPlante trick. I love it. But even if you can't do that, I think one of the things that you can see when you see people reacting, because what you have to remember is if you can read this as involuntary, right? The body's reacting to a big moment, and that's either like extreme excitement or extreme fear. And that doesn't really happen if you have queens here, because queens, you're kind of like, did I win? Did I win? I don't know. I might have the best hand. I might not. I don't know. But like, if you've got pocket eights here, you're probably feeling, there might be a straight out there, but you're feeling pretty good about yourself. Whereas if you've got ace king, you're like, I hope they fold. Please fold. Please fold. Please fold. And so those are the things I think that create that kind of reaction. And what that can help you do is cut out a lot of that. That overpair stuff that you were like considering when you got here, when you saw that deuce hit. Now our 7 feels like it's pretty good against everything but really extreme value. And now we have to go think back in the hand and think, can pocket 6s get here? Can pocket 8s get here with this exact action? And how many combos is that versus how many? I think what ultimately I would come down on is that there are a lot more combos of bluffs here than there are of that extreme value, that a player is going to play exactly with this line. I think the value we might see is 8s and 6s, and the bluffs are a lot of that overpair or over cards, like all the Broadway cards, basically.
And so
right. And he does mention that this player does bet and bet, right? Does tend to be a bit splashy, right? So.
And so to me, I would see a lot of ace king, a lot of ace queen, a lot of that kind of stuff showing up here when we call.
What I'd like to go back to the flop, like just take us a little bit backwards in this hand, because we're without the button in this hand. We have all of the nutted hands in our range versus like we have the nuts in our range, and under the gun shouldn't have the nuts in their range. We have all the 9 10s in our range. We have all the top 2 pairs, or all the 2 pairs of any kind, unsuited and suited, in our range as the big blind. When we have so if it was just us against the under the gun player, I actually would like a lead on this flop some of the time against certain players for like a third of the pot or something like that. Because we have the button in, now the button also has all of those, especially the suited combos, the 9-10 suiteds, all of those. So that sort of throws that idea out of the window. But I just wanted to put it out there that this is a really good type of flop that we can lead versus an under the gun opponent.
Yeah, great point.
Some of the time.
And that's for our listeners, that's a 6, 7, 8 rainbow flop. And it's true.
Right.
If you're under the gun players, they're not going to be opening hands like 9-10 from there. Even if they are opening, 10-9 suited, sometimes that's going to be a super small part of what they're doing it with. So I think that's a great point. Joe, you had something you wanted to get into earlier. Is it still a good time?
Well, I guess so. I mean, I think that the one thing that I would say about, given that you identified him as potentially being somewhat newer to the game based on whatever the tendencies are, although that was halfway, he may not know what is a great hand, that queens may only be. And I think that slowing down of breath is going to happen a lot faster for individuals who know what they're doing. If he doesn't know what he's doing really, and there's some suggestion within how he bet the straight flush, then maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's just learned, somebody said be aggressive, and so that's what he does, and he's got enough money to do it. And so when he's in a spot where he's either bluffing or he's got an overcard, he may think, oh my God, I got queens, and this is the best hand ever, and I hope he calls, and doesn't realize that that he really doesn't have the nuts on this particular board. So I think you need to be a little careful about the reads if he's new. If he's not so new, then I think it's more accurate.
That's a great point, Joe, because we actually, a couple of weeks ago, we did an episode with John, actually, who was here, talking about different levels and how the assumptions that you make about what level your opponent's on is really important when it comes to choosing the strategies to play against them. Like if you think that they're thinking on level 2, you want to be strategizing on level 3. But if they're only on level 1, then you're just going to out-level yourself if you're up here on level 3. So I think that's right, because a lot of these, especially new players, they're like, I've got a big pair. This is a value situation. And so they're not even thinking about it in terms of being a bluff or well, you said it perfectly, Joe. I can't improve upon that.
Right. What I just want to add to that, Jim, that even when people think they're not bluffing, that they think they have a good hand, we only have a bluff catcher, so we're still folding when they're breathing slows, even if they're mistakenly thinking that their pocket aces are the bomb, right? So their breathing is slowing, and we're still folding our second pair bluff catcher. So because it's still a bluff catcher against that. So we're only looking for a live tell that tells us this player knows that they're bluffing.
Right. Yeah, Joe, did you have something else there?
It just that a newer player, it's just going to take longer too. I think it was a minute that Kim said was the time frame.
Yeah, 2.
2 minutes. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not that far from my first tournament. It's only been about 2 years, and I can remember 3 minutes. I'm still, the bet's gone. We've gone an entire cycle. My heart's still pounding away, and I'm trying to just look cool sitting over in the corner. So you just have to be a little careful about that, but like the time too. But
yeah, totally. And I think also one other note, I probably played 500,000 hands online before I entered my first live tournament, and I felt like a newbie at the table. My chip mechanics were terrible. I didn't understand things about how to handle the small blind, big blind dynamic, like all sorts of, if you just saw me playing, if you were observing me playing at the table, you'd think this was my first few orbits playing poker. But I think I actually had a theoretical understanding, maybe an edge on the table, but I was clearly like a newbie there. So that is something as well, I think, and people can kind of identify themselves like that. I remember one time this guy across from me was really having trouble getting his chips in, but he said to his buddy halfway at the end of the hand, he's like, well, I was, drawing 4.5% on the turn. You're like, why not? Right. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you're an online player. Yeah, Rob.
Well, a lot of times too, an online player, when you're sitting there in your underwear playing poker online, you can do anything you want and no one's going to see you.
Right.
Whereas when you're sitting at a poker table, live table, all of a sudden you've got all of these people that are looking at you and could react to what you do. And so you want to look cool, right? You don't want to look like an idiot. So that could make you very nervous too. If you're bluffing and they call you, you could, even though it's a good bluff, you could be very nervous because you don't want anybody to know that you're bluffing. You want the guy just to fold. I bluff, that's great, but I don't want everybody to see me bluff. Whereas online, you don't care.
Right. Yeah, it's true. It's true. And you don't have to drive home when you're playing online either. So that does matter. Well, why don't we take a couple minutes here and just, since this is sort of about live tells and how they impact the game. Chris says, I've got to the point where I like looking like an idiot at the table. Yes, exactly. That's how, that's your evolution into sharkdom. Exactly. Now you start getting underestimated at the tables. That's exactly what you want, Chris. Why don't we take a couple minutes and just talk about some live tells that we've experienced or that we've given off ourselves, or what we think generally things mean strong or generally things mean weak. Rob says he waits to shuffle chips until the third level. Yep, exactly. There you go. Talk about like some false tells or something like that. So anyone can just unmute and get in if they're interested. Sometimes I think of like timing tells, that kind of thing. John?
For me, the biggest difference is whether the opponent knows they're being watched or whether they think they are not being watched. If they know they're being watched, then usually the tells are reversed. If they really put the chips into the pot with authority, that tends to mean that they're weak. If they tend to put them, just like they don't want to disturb the pot, or if they just barely touch the table and put them in there, then they usually will have a monster, as long as they are aware that they are being observed. However, if they're not aware they're being observed, then everything will come through more honestly. Like if you're pretty sure they don't know anyone's watching and you see them grimace, that means they didn't like whatever happened. Another thing is if they stare at the flop or when the turn card comes for an exaggerated length of time, that usually means that they're unhappy with it. And they are in their mind mentally going with, how could the poker gods put that card out there? That's not what I wanted. And these are generalizations. In any specific case, they may or may not be true. But there are things that I have found generally to be useful.
We got a couple comments in the chat here. Keith says, years ago playing blackjack tournaments, I would take Tylenol right before a tournament so my hands wouldn't just shake all the time. There you go. That's cool. And Kim says, hey, sometimes handshaking is just a hangover. Go with a breathing tell. One that I've noticed is some players, if you start developing chip stacks, like if you end up getting with a lot of chips in there and you've got different denomination chips, some players will happily throw in low denomination chips that they want to kind of get rid of when they're bluffing, and will play with the larger denomination chips when they are going to win that pot back, and those are the chips that they want to have back in their stack again later. So that's obviously is not always true, but if someone is typically betting with 1,000 chips and then they put in like a 3,000 bet with 500 chips, Kim says, more chips look scarier too. So sometimes that can be a way to kind of like strong is weak, weak is strong kind of thing as well. And I do want to say, when it comes to tells specifically, we talk about this all the time, these should really only be tiebreakers. What you should be using to make your decisions are a sound fundamental understanding of math and ranges and player types. And then if you're having trouble, like Andrew Brokus talks about having 3 buckets of hands: monsters, draws / air, and medium strength hands. And if you can eliminate one of those kinds of hands, then usually your job as a poker player is going to be much easier when it comes to ranging your opponent. So mostly we're in the elimination game as poker players. And these are, tells we should really just rely on them as kind of like a tiebreaker when you're having trouble deciding which bucket you think your opponent's in. Chris?
You mentioned timing. I think timing is such a big one. When people, so there's like two kinds of fast bets. There's like the fast bet where it's like, I don't have much of a decision here. And that's like, they just make the bet. And that's to me, like a evidence of like the Andrew Broca's condensed range. Like they don't have much of a decision whether to raise or fold. It's just like, I'm always kind of going with this. It's an easy decision. It's a middle of the road hand. But when it's super fast, when it's like beats you into the pot, it's faster than fast should be, really. Like that to me is a big tell of a player that usually has a pretty weak hand, especially if it's in earlier streets, because it's trying to sort of like send a message to you to like it's that opposite thing. And then the last thing that I think is really big is this is a Zach Elwood one, but that I have seen. If you let people and you get a talker and they have speech that's diminishing the strength of their hand, but in a way that is sort of like, well, I don't have quads here, or like those kinds of like, I hope you don't have quads. It's the things that like suggest that like they don't have the best hand, but they probably have the second best possible hand, right? That it's those kind of like speech things that I think are usually pretty reliable, at least with players who are, maybe not that self-aware.
And Chris, you're saying if the player is saying something that sort of like diminishes the strength of their hand, then they are holding a value hand more often than a bluff. Yes, because bluffers will not often subconsciously or consciously diminish the value of their hand in your mind.
Right. Yep. And so they're basically, they're trying to convince you that, well, I don't have the absolute goods here. So, but you can't beat me still. Is basically what they're saying. That's the subtext.
So would you ever, in that spot, if you were Taylor, would you ever initiate conversation with that person?
Mm-hmm.
Would you ever try to ask them a question? I've heard that you ask a question, kind of a question that has nothing to do with the hand.
Yeah.
And just to try to get his reaction. I mean, is that something that you could incorporate into your, other than waiting for 2 minutes?
Yeah, I've never done that. I know that people do that effectively, right? Where they ask him like, yo, so, what's your favorite fast food restaurant or something? And just get them to be like, and if they can naturally quickly answer, it's Arby's, then maybe they're feeling more comfortable. And if they're kind of like, just, like you're like, okay, they're nervous. I've never done that because I'm just not as comfortable with being like the speech play guy. But yeah, no, I've heard that can be a tactic you try if you're comfortable doing it.
That's one thing that Brad Booth used to say. He would go up to his favorite question to ask in those types of situations was, have you ever seen a baby pigeon? Because pigeons grow up, they're toddlers for a very short period of time. They don't leave the nest. So most people have never seen a baby pigeon. So that will it'll be out of the blue, total non sequitur. And the thing is if I were to ask that question, I wouldn't know how to evaluate the results. It's kind of like getting a lab result test at the doctor and they give you a number. It's 45. Okay. What is that? That's meaningless unless you understand how to interpret it.
That is a great point though, because what you're really trying to decide is how comfortable is my opponent. And so anything that you can elicit from them that's going to sort of, that they should normally be able to do like in a natural and comfortable way, that's going to be an indication. And this is really the prime spot when someone has shoved and the action's on you, you're the only person left in the hand. Like, okay, this is your time. Mystery player who's listening to this, this is your time. Take as long as you want. You're facing an all-in shove. You can ask them questions. You can talk about your own hand as much as you want. There's nothing prohibited at this point because the only action that's left is yours. So ask your opponent questions, wait, gauge their response, do anything you can that'll be helpful. Yeah, Chris.
I'll give you one more too, which is like if you're playing against the beginner we're talking about, that level 1 player, and you get the like sigh, exasperated shove, like just fold, like fold, like instant fold. Like that is like the most dead giveaway tell that has ever been on the earth.
Yeah.
Either that or the statement, "Oh, I guess it's time for me to go home now."
Yes,
me too.
Yeah. I'm out.
Yeah. All right. I guess this is my hand, everyone.
Yeah.
I'll also give the big head shake on the river card. Like, like when that river card comes in and then you get the shove over your best.
Yeah. That's right. That's funny. Yeah. And so I guess, and the one thing that it does kind of, it starts with a lot of weak means strong and strong means weak. But those can be kind of easy for people to start faking so it all comes down to, again, just with the rest of poker, what level is your opponent on? Are they on the level of just used to playing online like me and just like smiling or frowning naturally according to the action? Here, Joe, did you have something there?
Yeah, well, if you look at some of the neuroscience literature, particularly in terms of when people are thinking things through, what they can't do is they cannot speed up their thought process. So if you look at the concept of going through a swing in your mind, like imaging it, or it actually takes the exact same amount of time to go through that, regardless of whether you're thinking about it or you're doing it. And when you look, comparing that to when you look at Elwood's books, that's actually one of the things that's the hardest to fake. It's like if you're thinking through your decision process to decide how you're going to bet, you can't actually speed that up. You have to kind of go through it. And the faster that they are, that means they don't have to think about it. So it's one of the ones that you actually can't reduce down.
That's cool. I love it when we get to bring in some hard science on the side of this, because so much of the live tells are so sort of like anecdotal and very unscientific. But that's great. It makes perfect sense to me too. Anybody else? Any tells or fake tells or anything like that? Doesn't look like it. Well, then we're just going to wrap this baby up. So that means I get to thank our wonderful friends, Website Mark at Website Amp, and of course, Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Thanks to Taylor Moss for writing that one in there. And thanks to Rob, Kim, Joe, John, Stu, Keith, John, and Chris, and you, the listeners. Uh-oh.